Remember that the client you will be working with is looking for some fresh perspectives and ideas from our students. So while working on the Summer Student Innovation Challenge, you are representing the university. Therefore, it's really important for us to give you some hints and tips on securing a positive relationship with your client. The first thing we're going to consider is building rapport. So what is rapport? It's a close and harmonious relationship in which the people or groups concerned understand each other's feelings or ideas and communicate well. So now we know what rapport is, let's consider how we can develop this with our client. To start with, use your client's name. Ask if you're unsure on how to pronounce it. Think about your non-verbal communication. This is especially important in the current circumstances when all of your communication with the client is happening virtually, and even more challenging as a little square on a screen. Body language makes such a difference in face-to-face communication, so think about which aspects will still be important on video calls. Always think open, so ensure that you are sat in an upright position and never fold your arms. This is a classic sign of disengagement. Even when you're not the one speaking, show you're listening by remaining focused on the call throughout. Your facial expressions will be more important than ever, so ensure that you don't look bored or disinterested. While I'm conducting or attending video calls, I always smile and nod when I agree with a point, even when I'm muted, because it shows my interest in the meeting. Use minor movement throughout the call. Use hand gestures when appropriate. Nodding your head or making notes can make a big difference to the rest of the people present. Also, consider your tone of voice. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. Think about your pace, your volume, and varying your pitch. Video calls can be difficult to navigate. Sometimes there may be connection issues, so make sure you're speaking slowly, clearly, and relatively loudly to make sure your message is received by the recipients. Always remember that non-verbal cues are a two-way street, so try to pick up on your client's body language and tone of voice also. Make a good first impression with the client. Introduce yourself confidently, show interest in them and try to find some common ground. You can also build instant rapport by talking about them, asking thoughtful and relevant questions and actively listening to their answers. This builds connection and leads to building trust. It may lead us to things we may have in common or can relate to. How long have you worked for the organisation? Your job sounds really interesting. How did you get into it? By showing genuine interest in them as an individual, it's a great way to develop a professional connection. Empathy is really important when you're working in a consultancy-like situation. So put yourself in your client's shoes, especially when trying to understand what they want. Make sure that you remain solution-focused throughout. There are lots of little ways you can build trust with your client. Just as we discussed in the teamwork section of this training module, make sure you follow through on promises. But if you say you'll follow up the meeting with an email, make sure that you do it. But make sure you don't promise the world. The recommended time you should be spending on your project each day is 7 hours. So don't say that you will do something that's going to take you 10 to 12 hours to complete. Be realistic and honest. Your client will respect you for it. There will be various ways you communicate with your client throughout your project. Let's explore some best practices when communicating in different ways. One of the main channels of communication will be email. On day one of your project, once you meet your team, we highly recommend creating a professional email account which the whole team has access to. This will ensure that all communication to and from the client will be through one account, and you can avoid them receiving several emails from different personal or university accounts asking the same questions. You may even want to consider giving the responsibility of client emails to one member of your team, so there's consistency in the tone of the email. Always remember the potential pitfalls of written communication. There can be misinterpretation from either side, so make sure you read emails back to yourself, preferably out loud, so you can ensure what you've written is clear and appropriate to the situation. If your team is confused about something your client has sent to you, go back to them to clarify that you have understood correctly. Try to keep client emails as short and to the point as possible. You are much more likely to receive a quick response. Your client will be incredibly busy and be working on many things at once. There may also be juggling childcare responsibilities because of self-isolation or lockdown during the pandemic, so please understand it may take a few hours for them to respond to you. In a business environment, it is unnecessary to give lots of context via email. Just ask the question politely and with appropriate pleasantries. You're much more likely to receive a quick response this way. If your client opens your email in the middle of something and sees a huge block of text, they may mark it as unread and come back to it later. Whereas if they open it and see a question which they can answer quickly, they may respond straight away so it does not get added to their to-do list for later. Please ensure that you aim to respond to all emails the client sends you by the end of each day, even if it's just a thank you, if they've answered one of your questions or sent some information over. Finally, make sure that the emails are signed off appropriately and formally. Use kind regards or best wishes or something similar ahead of your name. Your video meeting with your client will be instrumental in the success of your project. Please ensure that you really utilise your client meeting and are prepared to ask all the questions you need for your project to move forward. It is best practice to send a follow-up email to thank them for their time and summarise your understanding of the meeting, so make sure you're making notes throughout to prepare for this. And also so you can refer back whilst working on your project to really ensure you are focusing on the outcomes your client is hoping for. Throughout your project, you will ask your client lots of questions. Make sure you're getting the most out of each question by using vocabulary which will encourage an in-depth answer. First, think about what you want to know and plan out the questions in a way that you aren't circling around and asking the same questions multiple times. Keep questions open by using what, when, how and why at the beginning of your questions to ensure that the answer required is not yes or no. Start your client meeting with lots of open questions so you can gather as much information as possible. Closed questions are a great way to display understanding of what's been discussed and really useful when you're concluding a topic. You can establish conclusion in a polite way by repeating back the information in the form of a closed question. This can ensure clarity for all involved and rounds up any loose ends at the end of a topic. Actively listening is really important when you are looking at communication as a two-way street. Don't fall into the trap of thinking communication is just about your message being clear to the receiver. You have just as much responsibility to ensure that you have understood what has been said to you. Let's circle back to the meaning of rapport. The people or groups concerned understand each other's feelings or ideas and communicate well. It is very important that you understand each other throughout, so make sure you are actively listening to your client in order to gain understanding. Remember to consider both your body language and the client's body language when you are listening, especially over a video call. Keep any questions you have relevant to the topic when listening to your client, which will show understanding and ensure that you are both clear about what is being discussed. Make sure you only ask questions which serve a purpose in the context. If you ask something which is irrelevant to what your client is saying, they may feel you are disinterested in what they are saying. Also, don't be too quick to jump in and interrupt your client with a question. They may well cover the answer in their explanation. Instead, make a quick note of your question and ask it at the end of that discussion if it has not already been answered or clarified for you. Finally, use repetition to show your understanding of what's been discussed. You don't need to run through every tiny detail you have been through, but highlight the key points to ensure that you are all on the same page.